Father, thank you so much for the privilege we have of being here to join our hearts together, to pray, to recognize your greatness, your sovereignty. Lord, as Christians, we believe that it is our responsibility to take stewardship for our state and for our country. And so we are unashamed to engage ourselves in the political arena and to legislation and to make decisions and provide leadership in a country that is founded on the Judeo-Christian ethic, the worldview, the Bible. And Lord, we thank you for the Word of God. We thank you that we can exalt the Word of God today and in this place to be able to have the freedom to lift up your name. And so today we pray for Raul. We pray for everyone that is here. Lord, I pray for those that are watching online today, every person far and wide that will be influenced by these moments, that your grace, your truth, your blessing be upon them. We give you praise today in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. John. Let's stand together as we pledge allegiance to the flag.
Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. All right, I'm now going to introduce Congressman Raul Labrador, who is going to speak to you and answer any questions. And our next governor, Raul Labrador.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Wow, that's loud. Can you hear me? All right. It's an honor to be here with you today, and I'm really excited about this opportunity that I have to run for governor of the state. I want to introduce myself a little bit and tell you a little bit about my background, and I hope that we can share some time answering questions and speaking to each other, just really having a dialogue. To me, today is very special because we're going to talk about what makes our nation great, which is our Judeo-Christian traditions. And I want to make sure that we as a state protect those traditions and the things that I think our founding fathers created this nation for. For those of you who don't know me, and some of you already know me pretty well, and I'm sorry, but I'm going to bore you with my story. But those of you who don't know me, I want you to know who I am and where I came from. Most of you know that I was born and raised in Puerto Rico. I lived there till the age of 13. I was actually raised by a single mom, and why this topic today is so important to me. My mother was a wonderful woman who taught me certain principles and certain values in my life, and she wanted me to live the kind of life that would be exemplary. She had a difficult time when she got pregnant with me. As you can imagine, it was 1967, and she had a lot of people in her life who were encouraging her to either put me up for adoption or something worse. And she had to really look internally at what she was going to do as a mother, a single mom who had a good job, who had a lot to lose by having a child at that time. And in her mind, she decided that she was not only going to have this child, but that she was going to give this child a good life. So those of us who are pro-life, it's not just about being pro-life, it's about making sure that life is worthwhile. And she wanted this child to have a good life, so she sacrificed everything in her life. At the time when she had me, she actually lost her job when she became a single mom. And she had a good job that she really loved. But she decided that she was not going to let that put her down. So she did everything she could to sacrifice for me. And that meant at some time she put me in private schools. My whole 8 years in school in Puerto Rico, I was in a private school. I went to a military school for a few years. Then I went to a bilingual school, which is where I learned to speak English well. Some of you think we may not be that good, but it's but that's where I became fully bilingual, and I was able to speak in both languages and read and write. My mom loved literature. She loved poetry. And so when I was speaking in both languages, she wanted me to read the best books, to read the best poems, to follow the best art. She wanted me to know about the world. And she wanted me to have a better life, which is I think what every one of us wants for our kids, right? She wanted me to have a better life than she had, number one. And number two, she wanted me to not make any excuses for the things that were happening in my life. If I ever complained about something, if I ever complained about not having a father in my home or anything like that, she would get after me. And she would tell me that I have no right to complain about life because I was fortunate to have a good home, 4 walls, food on the table. And she always wanted to make sure that I always understood that we were blessed by the things that we had and the things that surrounded us. When I was 13, she decided that she wanted to move to the mainland from Puerto Rico. She wanted, again, every decision was based on making sure that I had better opportunities. So she decided that she thought the only way I was going to have a good future was if we moved from Puerto Rico to the mainland. And she decided, of all places, to move to the mainland, which was kind of weird for me at the time. She moved to Las Vegas, which I didn't understand at the time. But for her, it made sense because she was working in the hotel industry in Puerto Rico, and she was just going to go work in the hotel industry in Las Vegas. In Las Vegas, I actually had some changes in my life. And those changes were very positive for me. And I just love the fact that I can speak to you about these changes here because it shows the brotherhood of Christ and it shows the brotherhood of all men. I actually became a member of the LDS faith, which is not a faith that I share with many of you, but it shaped me and turned me into the person that I am today. I learned, one of the reasons we joined the church is because she saw a group of men and women who were dedicated to helping young people become better people. And even though she was a wonderful mom, she understood that she needed the help of other people to sort of shape me and guide me. And in that church, I actually ended up joining the Scout program, all that stuff. I'm an Eagle Scout. I became a leader in the Scouting program. I did a lot of different things. And I eventually went on a mission for my faith. I spent 2 years in South America as a missionary, and I came back, and I was a student at BYU. And many people ask, well, how did you end up in Boise, Idaho? Well, I met a young, beautiful woman from Boise, Idaho at BYU, and the rest is history. I first fell in love with her, then I fell in love with her family, and then I fell in love with the state. And I just thought, there's no other place where I want to raise my family. So even though I'm not a native like some of you, I chose Idaho because I think it's such a wonderful place. It's a place where families love each other, where communities take care of each other, and that we all have this desire and this passion to become better and stronger. So I've had this amazing opportunity over the last 8 years to be a member of Congress, to be your representative in Washington, D.C., and you've given me this amazing honor to represent you. But I look at the future of the nation, and I look at the future of the state, and I realize that I want every child in Idaho to have those same opportunities that I had as a young man. I want every child to understand that they're valued, that they have a future, that they can become anything they want to do. Because that's the one thing my mother taught me as a young man. So you can be anything you want to be. However, you have to work hard. You have to play by the rules. You have to make sure that you get good grades in school. You have to make sure that you have a good education. And you have to make sure that you have a vision and a plan for the future. I remember one of the most important things that my mother taught me is that just because I grew up in a single-parent home, that didn't mean that that was a good thing. She didn't try to make excuses for her parenthood, but she said, I want you to be a good father. I want you to be a good husband. I want you to be a good provider. Those are the things that are the most important. So those are things that I have lived with in my life. And it doesn't matter what success I have in life. I've been a successful lawyer. I was a successful business owner. I think I've been a pretty successful member of Congress, and I hope to be a successful governor. But nothing in my life is as worthwhile as the success that I can have in the home. I hope that my children and my grandchildren will have the opportunity to have better lives than I have had. And I think that's what we should all be about, is making sure that our communities and our state are strong enough where we can grow strong families, where our kids understand that they have a future and that we believe in them. Sometimes I think politicians look at kids and they look at them as hopeless kids because they don't have a future. And every time I look into the eyes of a child, I actually see somebody like myself. When I see kids that maybe may be struggling a little bit, I think, you know, this kid has potential, has never-ending opportunity. And we need to make sure that as a government, that we believe in those kids and that we give them the opportunities, that we provide the environment for them to thrive and succeed. We don't do things for people necessarily, but we need to provide an environment where people can survive and succeed and do the things that they need to do. So I'm just really excited to be here with you. I'm excited for this opportunity that I have to run for governor, and I'm looking forward to your questions. I'm grateful for the opportunities that you have given me to serve you, and I will take whatever questions you have at this time. Thank you very much.
We'll make it easy on him, Raul.
All right.
Let me borrow your mic for a second. My name is Don. Whoa, I got the voice, yeah. All right, my name is Don Bradway, and I'm involved with Raul's campaign here in North Idaho. It's my honor and privilege to be here. And one of the things we found in running town halls like this is it's much easier to have questions submitted so we can then read them and have our featured speaker respond to those. There was a kerfuffle up front. We had a lot of people sign in because they wanted to be on the mailing list, that type of thing, and people sort of passed up that neon stack of business cards that were asked for. Oh, look, we got some over there. Good. So we'll start collecting those, please. And so we'll be taking the questions. And I did have a couple submitted to me. So let's get that mic fired up.
Hello? No? You see, he takes the good one.
That's how you do these things. Here, let's get it fired up. Oh, one of those buttons there. There we go. Thanks, Shane.
Testing.
That's an alarm.
Hello? Can you hear me?
We can hear you now. Okay, the first question that we received is, what are your goals on decreasing forest fires? And I would imagine forest fires here in the state of Idaho.
Excellent. What are my goals in decreasing forest fires? All right. So that's a great question. I actually have a bill in Congress that's called the Self-Sufficient Community Lands Act. I believe very strongly that the state should manage our lands, not just our state lands, but our federal lands. I believe strongly that we do a better job managing those lands. And in fact, the science shows that our state-managed forests are healthier and more vibrant than our federal lands. So what I think we should be doing is take that management responsibility away from the government. Because what the federal government is doing is they're allowing too many forest fires by the way that they're managing the land. And the way what's happening, some of our forests have too much growth. They have too much brush, and all those things cause and create forest fires. So, but if you look at our state lands, you know, you can't say that there's no fires on state land, of course. But what you see that happens on our state lands is that the fires burn less strongly, and we're able to manage those fires better. There's also better salvaging on state forests. Because what happens is that you can go immediately after the fire and take out some of the rotting and some of the burning trees that are on there. And that all leads to actually a safer environment. And, you know, I always love the environmentalists who keep saying that we should manage at the state level. But these forest fires are actually endangering us with the CO2 that comes from forest fires and other things. It's not good for the environment. So there's a lot of things that we can do. I think we can do it better. And I'm fighting for that actively in Congress. And I will continue to fight for that as your governor. I think the more control we have over our state lands, the more management we have over our state lands, the better it will be for us in the future.
What are your thoughts on Agenda 21 and or Agenda 30?
You know, I'm against anything that, we need to stop letting international communities and the federal government tell us things at the state level on how we can do. We need to make sure that the state is sovereign and supreme, and we need to make sure that we do whatever we can to stop the encroachment of federal agencies, federal government, and any international communities that that might be interested in telling us how to live our lives.
Are you in favor of a constitutional amendment on marriage being between one man and one woman? And
Not only am I in favor of it, we already have one at the state,
right.
and I voted for that constitutional amendment at the state level, and I think the state needs to do everything it can to protect that state decision. It shouldn't be, you know, marriage is interesting. Marriage was never, if you look at our Constitution, marriage was never intended to be the province of the federal government. It was left up to the states. And some members of Congress forget that. Congress believes that they can be a super legislature, that they can tell the states what to do. It's the other way around. We had unlimited power at the state level, and we gave enumerated powers to the federal government so they can determine certain small things. We have turned that around and turned the Congress into a super legislature. It's one of the problems that I have in Washington, D.C., is that many members of Congress think that they have to have a solution for every problem that is happening in America. I actually think most of those solutions should be done at the state level, and that's why I want to come back to the state and make sure I fight hard for the states to be able to be supreme in most of these decisions that are being made at the federal level.
I'm worried about wolf predation of my livestock.
About what?
About wolf predation.
Okay.
Can we keep the wolves out of Idaho?
We
That
can
would be the animals.
Yes. Yes, we can. We have to be, you know, we have an agreement, and we had we already went through this a few years ago, where we allowed a certain number of wolves to be in the state of Idaho, and I think in that case we should allow those numbers. Well, what's happened is, you know, that number of wolves has increased tremendously, and we need to make sure, and I'm grateful that the state has allowed the hunting season for wolves, and I think we need to do what we can to keep those numbers low. But I think there has to be a certain level of wolves in the state, and we need to continue to make sure that we have that fine balance.
Okay.
And we need to be careful about I mean, most people are concerned about their livestock. If you talk to a lot of the ranchers in the state, they're having some serious problems with the wolf population, and we need to make sure that we control it.
Right. Okay. This is interesting. As a supporter of conservative values, I'm interested in films that reflect these values. Idaho does not have a strong film initiative to attract filmmakers. Can you help? Actors are being brought in from Los Angeles and other out-of-state areas for films, advertising, commercials, print work, etc. Local actors are available. Can you help them?
Great question. Actually, and I hope the person who asked this question is not going to like my answer, but I hope you learned something from this answer. I'm never going to tell you what you want to hear. I'm going to tell you what I believe. And I think that's one of the things that you will like about me, is that sometimes we may disagree on an issue, but I'm not going to play the politician where I'm going to tell you something just because I think you believe a certain way. I'm going to tell you exactly what I think about an issue. So that question was really great. We do want family films to be made in Idaho. We want good, positive role models for our kids, and we want good art being depicted in the movie theaters. But I don't think it's the province of the state to pick winners and losers. In fact, what happens when you allow the state to make these kind of decisions is that the state makes poor decisions. I'm not smart enough to know what industry should be successful or not. That should be up to the market to determine what industry should be successful or not. So if we want to have good actors and good movies, then you need to go out and make sure that you create an environment where you are attracting those good industries and those good movies and those things happening in Idaho. What I want to do is I want to get out of your way. I don't want the government to be making it impossible for you to have a film industry in the state of Idaho, but I'm not going to give you money to have an industry, a film industry in the state of Idaho. Because then we get into picking winners and losers. And we get into the government saying, I prefer this industry over this other industry. And that ends up being dangerous for the state. Because what ends up happening is that I take money from your pocket to put it into somebody else's pocket. So you never want me as governor to decide what industries I want to attract to the state of Idaho. What you want me as your governor is to decide that I want all industries to be free to be successful in this state. And that's why I want to make sure that we have low taxes, that we have low regulation, that we interfere as little as possible with the industries. As your governor, I want the government to be as inconsequential in your lives as possible. But it's up to you to decide if one industry is going to be more successful. That's going to be by your industry, by your work, by your determination, all those things. Because what's happening, if you look right now at the film industry in particular, you have states like New Mexico and other states that have given millions and millions of dollars to the film industry. Guess what's happening in all those states? They're finding out that not enough money is coming into the state to make up for the money that's going out in the tax incentives and other things that they're doing. In fact, what you're finding, most of these states, what ended up happening was a race to the bottom, where all these states started competing against each other and offering different incentives. And all those states started seeing the revenues go down when it came to some of the industries, and then that money's going to the film industry, or whatever it is the winners, the winner that they pick for that month or for that year. So I will never try to incentivize a specific business. What I will do is I will incentivize all businesses. I will make sure that the environment is such that all businesses can thrive. And then you guys need to decide through your efforts what businesses are going to be successful or not in the state.
This should resonate with this crowd. What will you do to keep Idaho from becoming progressive, especially with the influx of Californians moving here?
Wow. There are no Californians in North Idaho, are there? You know what, I'll tell you a story. About 20 years ago, I was having this debate with some people in politics, and they were afraid that all the California influence that was coming into Idaho was going to make it more progressive. And what I have found, and it's been my experience, is that the majority of people that are coming from other states are the conservatives that are leaving those states. So if you look at so if you look at Boulder, Colorado, for example, if people leave California to go to Boulder, they're usually people who want to live in a place like Boulder, Colorado. So there's a more liberal people from California and other states. In Idaho, it's the opposite. We have a good, strong conservative community, a good, strong conservative values, and the majority of the people that are coming to Idaho are coming here for the right reasons, and they want to keep the state more conservative. In fact, I have noticed, if you think about the political history of North Idaho, it has turned more conservative since more Californians came to the state of Idaho. However, I want to make sure that we in the governor's office continue that strong conservative ethos of making sure that the state is for conservative principles. Because if we continue to be a strong conservative state that protects conservative values, and we do the things that conservatives should be doing, we will be attracting the right kind of people to come to the state. So it's up to us as communities and as members of the legislature of Congress to make sure that we keep Idaho strong and that we make Idaho stronger. And we can do that by making sure that we fight for those conservative principles that we want. So I welcome all people to come to Idaho and that want to keep it conservative, want to keep it a great state. I want to make it stronger for future generations.
That does seem to be the case here in North Idaho.
Yes.
Okay, we've got a couple of questions that involve the Avistas. So I'll sort of blend them together. Can you get involved to stop the Avista sale to Canada? And how do you feel about the USA public utility, which would be Avista, being sold to Canadian Ontario Hydro One, which is 49% Canadian government owned, and can you influence FURC to stop this sale?
That's a great question, and I'm sorry I don't have a great answer. This is something that I'm just learning a lot about recently. One of the concerns that I have with this sale, so yes, I am concerned about this sale. What can I do? I'm not really sure. I need to look at this a little bit more. But one of the concerns I have with the sale is that obviously the water rights that we have up here are going to be affected by this. And as you know, Canada wants to own most of these water rights. So we need to look at this this is a pretty important international issue, and it's a very important thing for the state of Idaho. What we can do, I don't have a good answer for that right now, but we're looking into this issue right now.
How will you stand up for our community that is being bullied by the Bureau of Land Management in using our public lands for special interest groups?
That's the first thing that we need to do in the governor's office. I don't think there's been enough protection and fight from the governor's office, and it's one of the reasons that I want to be your governor. When I went back to Washington, D.C. 8 years ago, 7 years ago now, almost 8, I wanted to fight from the federal level and prevent some of the things from happening against the state. But the bureaucracy is so strong, and some of the laws prevent us from doing things. And I think we haven't fought enough over the last 15 years or so against the federal government. We need to stand up against the Bureau of Land Management. We need to look to the legislation, exactly what rights they have, what rights they don't have. But again, I go back to my #1 goal, which is when it comes to lands, we need to be able to manage those lands under state management practices. If you compare the state lands to the federal lands, the state lands are very good about what we call multiple use. On state land, you can camp, you can fish, you can do all the different things, but you can also use the state lands for productive use. What we have is a lot of counties are complaining right now that they keep going back to Washington, D.C., begging for more money. They keep begging for more money because they're not able to use their natural resources on their own land. I want our counties and our cities to be able to use those natural resources, to be able to manage those natural resources, and to use them for the benefit of the local community. If they can use them for the benefit of the local community, they're not going to have to go back to Washington, D.C. to ask for more money. We saw the environmentalists and the left make it more difficult for us over the last 20, 30 years to use our natural resources on our state land, and we need to fight against that, and we need to make sure that we allow our communities to take advantage of that.
Well, a good segue from that is I have been dubious of Department of Interior's Secretary Zinke. How much influence does he have over the Bureau of Reclamation and the Bureau of Indian Affairs?
Well, I would have to know a little bit more why they're dubious about Secretary Zinke. I have been pleasantly surprised by some of the things that Secretary Zinke has done. He is, I don't know if you know that, I was one of the finalists for the Secretary of Interior. I was one of 2 finalists. Representative Zinke obviously became the Secretary. And I'm actually really grateful for that because I really wanted to come back home and do what I'm doing right now. And it would have been hard to turn down a president, if they would have offered the position. But I had some doubts about what he was going to do. And I've seen him do some pretty strong things. I would have to talk to this individual about what exactly they have. Now, the problem that any secretary has, this is Zinke, or it would have been me, or anybody else, is that you have a bureaucracy that is working under you. And what we have allowed is this amorphous bureaucracy to really control what's happening in Washington, D.C. In fact, many bureaucrats will tell members of Congress that they don't care about what they have to say because those members of Congress are not going to be there that long. And they are going to be in the bureaucracy forever. And what we have done in Washington, which is a huge mistake, which is one of the great things which is the opposite of what Idaho does, we keep writing legislation, and I vote against this legislation all the time, that gives and cedes all the authority to the bureaucracy, as opposed to be clearly and explicitly stated in the legislation. We need to have members of Congress that understand that they're the ones who need to make the tough choices. They're the ones who need to identify what issues need to be addressed in legislation. Instead of writing a piece of legislation, I've seen this so many times where it says, the Secretary of Interior shall do X. or the Secretary of Health and Human Services shall do X, and they will decide how to implement that plan. What we're doing is we're ceding all of our power as member of Congress, and that's very frustrating. And I think that's why you need governors throughout the United States to fight that bureaucracy and to go against the things that that bureaucracy is doing, because we need to make sure that we understand that it's the legislators who make the law. It's not the executive branch that makes the laws. The executive branch is supposed to enforce the law, but not decide what laws are going to be in place or not. So I think a good governor can go through the law and fight the federal bureaucracy and say, look, you don't have the authority to do X or Y. Or if we find areas where they have ceded that authority, go back to the legislators and let them know that they need to rewrite the way that they're doing.
So you believe in the 10th Amendment?
I do, very strongly.
All right, I have two that I can dovetail. How, given the title of today's traditional Christian view here, how can Christians promote better government, and tell us how your Christian worldview would guide you as governor?
Great question. So the best way that Christians can get involved is by deciding that they care about the future of the state at the political level, not just at the purely Christian and religious level. I think sometimes and I find this in my faith and I find it in people of other faiths, that they almost become despondent because they see so much evil in the world, and they think that there's not much that we can do because there's so much evil in the world, so we're just going to take care of our families, we're just going to take care of our immediate needs. But you need to realize that you can make important decisions, and you can make that you have this power and the strength and the numbers to actually sway what happens at the state level. If every Christian that is out there becomes involved in a campaign or in a race, they can actually influence what happens and which way the government is going to be selected and elected in this state. So you need to start looking beyond yourselves. And I know it's difficult because you start looking at what's happening in the world, you start looking at the tragedies that are happening, and you become very insular because you start thinking, I just want to take care of my family, I just want to take care of my wife and my kids and all those things. But I think I think the gospel teaches us, it's gospel of good news, and it teaches us that we have a moral responsibility to go out there and preach the word, but also to make sure that the world is a better place. That is one of our responsibilities, not just our immediate world, but the world at large. And I think we can really influence what happens by getting involved. Another thing that we can do is having events like this, talking to each other, having people of different faiths, realizing where they have things in common and where they don't have things in common, that they can agree to disagree on those things. But I think most of us have similar values and similar beliefs and similar ideas and similar goals that we want for the world, for our communities, for our state. And I think that's something that we can do very well. What was the other question?
Well, that was pretty much,
Okay.
How would that guide you as governor?
Okay, that's how it would guide me. Yes, thank you.
All right, there's an issue, this is an understatement, there's an issue with support of our president. As governor, what will you do to pass bills to support not only our president, but to pass bills to help the average American citizen?
What was the second? To pass bills?
Pass bills to help the average American citizen.
Great. So that's a really important question. I want to tell you a little bit of a story so you understand. Of all the candidates running in this race for governor, I'm the only one who actually went out of his way to make sure that Donald Trump got elected. So you have three major candidates in this race. One of the candidates actually said that he would not vote for President Trump and said that he would actually vote for somebody else in the general election. The other candidate didn't do much to get him elected. I actually went out of my way and I traveled the United States to make sure that Donald Trump got elected. And I had a really interesting experience because he was a nominee of my party, but I didn't know him very well. He had actually donated to my campaign, and we had just a very peripheral interaction. But when I got a call from the Trump campaign, and they asked me if I would go out and campaign for him in different states. And I said, I would love to, but I want to get to know him. I want to see him face to face, and I want to make sure that we agree on some of the issues that are important to the United States. So they very nicely allowed that to happen, and I got to meet with Donald Trump about 5 months before the election. And at that time, I had one simple question for him. That simple question was about the Supreme Court, because to me, the most important thing that the next president of the United States was going to do is decide who was going to be sitting in the Supreme Court. And he had, if you guys remember, at the time he had chosen about 11 people to be on a list, but he kept saying that I'm going to choose somebody from this list or somebody like it. And I didn't like that answer, because somebody like this means that it could be anybody. It could, it didn't have to be somebody on that list. And I asked him the question point blank, why do you keep saying that? And he was so gracious, and he said, Raul, I understand your concern, and I have some reasons why I've been saying that, but I agree with you. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add 10 names to that list, and then I'm going to stop saying somebody and somebody like it. And I just thought, that's a promise that some politician made to me. I'm sure that's not going to happen. And 2 days later, he comes out with a list of 21 people that are going to be on that list. And he stops using the phrase, and somebody like it. In fact, he said, I'm going to pick from this list. I wish I could take credit for all of that. I think it probably was something that was already in the process, but it happened right at that time. And what I remember about him is that he looked me in the eye, he told me he was going to do something, and he followed through on it. So I immediately called the campaign and I said, where do you need me? You tell me where you want to go. So I spent 2 weeks going out throughout the United States. And these were 2 weeks that were some of the lowest 2 weeks of the campaign, because this was at a time when some audios came out that were really not the best audios out there. And a lot of Republicans were moving away, and they were saying, I can't vote for this guy and all these things. And I just kept thinking about one thing. I kept thinking about the Supreme Court. I kept thinking about how important that was for the future of the United States. And I said, yeah, there are some things that I don't like about what he said, what he has done, but there's a big difference between the two candidates. One's going to give me the Supreme Court that I want. The other one is not. And then on other issues, I knew that I could agree with him as well. So I did everything I could. I went out of my way to make sure that he got elected. It's one of the reasons that I think he considered me for the cabinet, and it's one of the reasons that I continue to have a good relationship with the president and his family and many members of the cabinet. So I think I will be able to work with the president and work with him in a way that no other candidate in this race is going to be able to work with the president. Now, for the people of Idaho, for me, just like for Trump, he keeps talking about America first. Every decision that I will make is for Idaho first. I want to make sure that we make the state stronger, and that the decisions that are made in the governor's office are for the benefit of Idaho and the future of Idaho.
We have a nice stack of very good questions here. I know this is supposed to end at 2:30. Will you be able to stick around afterwards, or what will your schedule allow?
I think I only have a few minutes, about 10 minutes afterwards, so let's try to answer as many questions as possible.
Okay. Well, I have one that's a long
Make sure
question.
it's only the good questions.
Well, this is a good one. The reason I say it's good because I've been involved with the gentleman who asked this question. I think it's important because it does involve the governor's office, specifically for the state of Idaho. I'm a small business owner. I have been running it for nearly 4 years now. I will be 30 in April this year. There are incredibly few folks my age who own their business or who desire to do so. A large factor for this is the high barrier to entry, much of which is due in large part to government. Even in Idaho, regulation, taxation, occupational licensing constantly stands in the way. In my industry, Premium Cigar Lounge, I face an enormous 40% excise tax, and this means it's on top of, that's a state tax, as on top of the federal tax that you would be paying. So Idaho tax 40% on top of the price he has to pay. That's important to understand that.
What industry is that again?
He sells premium cigars.
Okay,
And
and there's a 40%
There's a
excise.
40% state tax on top of the federal tax that he pays for those cigars.
Okay.
All right, so,
I didn't know that.
well,
So-
now you do, and that's why I wanted to
Yes.
read, because this is very important, because it does affect money that isn't coming into this state. It renders me completely uncompetitive to the online market for cigars. Additionally, archaic liquor laws hamper my economic opportunities and creates more meddlesome, good word, and destructive enforcement and intrusion. You, as governor, can add a helping hand in remedying all of this. As a member of LDS, can good policy, liberty-minded policy transcend religion?
Yes, so great question. So let's answer the last question first quickly. We need to modernize our liquor laws in the state of Idaho. We need to figure out, work with the legislature, figure out how to do that, because we have some issues where certain businesses are unable to thrive and survive and even come to Idaho because of our antiquated liquor laws. So yes, we need to do something about that, absolutely. The other question is a bigger question, and I don't know that I can answer the specific question because I didn't know about the cigar excise tax, and I need to know a little bit more before I say something about an issue that I'm not as familiar with. But I can tell you what I'm most disappointed in right now with Idaho is our high taxes. How many of you know that we have the most Republican legislature in the state of Idaho, and we have some of the highest taxes of any of our neighbors? That's a shame. We keep saying that we're this conservative state, and we're not a conservative state, we're a Republican state. But conservatism means that you're going to impede barriers to entry for business. You're going to get away with whatever barriers to entry for business. Being a conservative means that you're going to have low taxes, low regulation, and you're going to actually work with the business community to make sure that they can have the freedom and flexibility to be successful. Just like I told you in the beginning, I'm not going to pick winners and losers in the governor's office. But I'm also not going to make it difficult for businesses to do their duty and their responsibility. One of the main things I want to do is I want to lower all of our taxes. I want to work with the Idaho legislators. I want to put all of the business tax exemptions that are on the books, and I want to tell them, okay, we need to lower our taxes dramatically. And what I have is what I call the 555 plan. We're right now at 7.6% corporate and individual and at 6% sales tax. I want to bring our sales tax, our corporate and individual taxes to 5%. And I want to get rid of some of the loopholes that are in the tax code so we can have a fair and broader tax. What's that going to do? That's going to make us competitive with all of our neighbors. So when a business is looking at moving to the state of Idaho, the CEO is not going to look at our income tax and say, if I move to Idaho, I'm going to have a 7.6% income tax, but if I move to Utah, I'm going to have a 5% tax. Or if I move to some other state, some of our neighbors don't even have an income tax. So we're very anti-competitive, and it's becoming very difficult for existing businesses to grow and for new businesses to move into the state. In fact, I'm finding more and more that existing businesses are being lured by other states because they're being offered all these tax incentives. So what are they doing? They're asking the government to give them tax incentives. And my answer to them is going to be, no, I'm not going to give you a specific tax incentive for your business. I'm going to lower taxes for every business so everyone can be successful in the state of Idaho. And that's what I want. So I want to work with this business. I need to know a little bit more about this issue, but I want to make sure that every business understands that they can be successful under a Labrador governorship.
Since we touched on the 10th Amendment, let's follow up with this one. And Colorado and Washington have exercised their states' rights to legalize marijuana. Will Idaho exercise its states' rights to end abortion if you are governor?
To end abortion?
Yes.
Yes, we need to work within the framework that we currently have. Unfortunately, the Supreme Court has a problem with this issue, and we need to do everything we can, little by little, to make sure that we end abortion in the state of Idaho. The most important thing, I'm pro-life. I believe that life begins at conception, but we are dealing with the reality of the Supreme Court. I know some people may disagree with this, but we need to make sure that we work with the Attorney General's office and with the Governor's office to ensure that we have the right fights. For example, we just passed a law out of the House of Representatives that disallows abortions after 20 weeks.
Yeah.
I think that's a great piece of legislation that would survive a legal challenge in the courts. I think those are the kinds of things that we need to look at. We need to be more aggressive in our pro-life stances. But if we just go ahead and just ban abortion completely, that the Supreme Court is going to disagree with us. Whatever we believe, the Supreme Court is going to fight us on that. I would rather have small victories like that. And imagine, there's 2 bills that we can work on in the state. We can disallow abortions after 20 weeks. There's also a bill that we've been working on, which is the pain-capable bill, that disallows abortions when a child gets to the stage where they actually feel pain in the fetus. And as science is progressing, we learn that stage becomes shorter and shorter and shorter. So I think if we're going to be strong on this issue, we also need to be smart. And we need to make sure that we have those victories that we can survive a challenge in the Supreme Court. But I think we also need to be creative. And I always use this example. Ted Cruz is a friend of mine, and he's a good friend. And do you know how Ted Cruz made his name? He found a way to redefine the way the Second Amendment was defined. Until Ted Cruz became the Solicitor General of the state of Texas, this Second Amendment was only seen as a state issue, and it wasn't seen as so it was a state's, it was, the definition of the Second Amendment only defined it as to what the federal government could do vis-a-vis an individual, not what the states could do vis-a-vis an individual. He found an innovative way to redefine the Second Amendment, and the Heller decision that came out of that fight redefined the Second Amendment as an individual right. It's the right of the individual to have arms. So instead of Ted Cruz figuring out, fighting an unwinnable fight, he used his brain to figure out a way to fight in the Supreme Court in a way that extended the rights that we have. So I think that's what we have to do. We have to have our best lawyers, our best minds, look at these pro-life issues. And the governor's office needs to work hand in hand with the pro-life community to make sure that we can have the right policies that are being sent out, because they're all going to be challenged. And remember, they're all going to be challenged in the Ninth Circuit. So we need to make sure that these are good, smart fights so we can take them all the way to the Supreme Court.
Okay, as an addition to that, I had a chance to talk with one of the pastors, and he had hoped to ask you this earlier, and that was, the state received block grants from the federal government, and they quite often come with strings attached. And he said, would you be willing to take those block grants and disperse those, particularly if they came from health and welfare? In the past, Planned Parenthood seems to get an abnormal amount of money. Would you be willing to take that money to give it to other?
Yeah, but I don't think Planned Parenthood should have a single cent from the government, whether it's federal or state. And I'm willing to give that money to other health service organizations that are provided benefits to poor women and different communities. In fact, if you think about it, Planned Parenthood, I think in Idaho, only has 2 or 3 facilities. There are well over 100 facilities in the state of Idaho that provide services to women in vulnerable positions. So yes, I think we can do much better at the state.
Okay, very good. What is your position on government's role in taking care of the most vulnerable? And I would imagine that would be young, ill, senior. That was as far as they went, the most vulnerable.
So this is the $64 billion question, right? What is the responsibility of the government? We should take care of the vulnerable. We should take care of the people who cannot take care of themselves. And I don't have a problem with that. What I think where we need to stop is able-bodied individuals should take care of themselves, and the government should not be taking care of them. So, and it's one of the things that I learned from my mom. I told you about what an amazing woman she was. She would never accept welfare. We had many times she would work 2 or 3 jobs because in her mind, welfare was destructive to the soul. It was something that made it more difficult for people to actually come out of poverty and things like that. So I believe that we should take care of the vulnerable, those people who can't work, who have maybe a handicap or something like that. But we need to be very careful. When you're an able-bodied individual, the government shouldn't be taking care of you should be taking care of yourself.
What is your view on mandatory vaccinations, especially when it comes to kids not being allowed in school if they're not vaccinated?
I'm against it.
Idaho hasn't done anything to help parents choose Christian education. Will you help pass legislation? I know voters want the answer.
Yes, I think this is very important. There was a recent Supreme Court case, did not have anything to do with education, but it showed that some of the laws that were passed in the 30s that prevented religious institutions to receive some money from the government, that it was being misinterpreted, that there should be no money going to religious institutions. So the first thing I want to do is I want to make sure on education that the money follows the child. I want to make sure that I also want to make sure that the local communities have control over what's happening. We always complain about the federal government telling the state what to do when it comes to education, but we have just as big a problem at the state level, state bureaucrats in Boise telling local communities what to do when it comes to education. So one of the things I want to do is I want to make sure that we have a better relationship with our local school districts. I want to make sure that our local school districts understand that there's going to be high standards. I want to get rid of Common Core. Institute high standards for our schools. I want every child in Idaho to understand that we expect a lot from them, but that we also believe that they can achieve these high standards, that they can actually do the things that are necessary for them. But once we set those high standards, we need to give the local school districts the flexibility to do things differently. For example, here in Coeur d'Alene, you may do different things that my schools need to do in Eagle because of your local community, your local needs. So we need to make sure that we incentivize the school districts that if they meet those high standards, they're going to receive certain rewards for that. But we can't get in the way of them. Sometimes the state legislators, and I love the state legislators, I have great relationships in the state legislature, but they really want to tell the school districts how to do every single thing. And I think we need to stop that because we need to trust our local teachers, our local parents, and our local school districts that they want the best for their local kids. Let's set those high standards, but let's make sure that we give that flexibility to the local community so they can achieve those high standards that I think we expect of our kids.
I've been told we have time for one more question, at least as far as this event goes. So it's going to be sort of a compilation of a number of things regarding...
So we have time for one question. You're going to ask 10 questions in one. Is that what
yes,
you're saying?
Very quickly.
Okay.
Speed question. No, this has to do with refugees and illegals and building the wall and sending illegals back to their home country.
Okay. So let's start with immigration. Okay. I believe immigration is a good thing for the United States. So some of you may disagree with me, but actually I am for legal immigration. I believe that new immigrants who come to the United States can provide strength, can provide a sense of making our nation greater. What's hurting and killing our nation is illegal immigration. And we need to do everything we can to make sure that we prevent illegals from coming into the United States. So there's certain things that we must do. The first thing that we need to do is we need to make sure that we enforce the laws that are in the books. It's already illegal to be in the United States, illegally, right? So let's enforce those laws. That's why I'm the chairman of the Judiciary Subcommittee on Immigration and Border Security. And we have passed out of my committee the Davis-Oliver Act, which gives us the ability to do the second thing that I think we need to do, which is allow local communities to help in the enforcement of immigration laws. It allows the local sheriffs and the local police to assist in the enforcement of the law. And this is something that people don't understand a lot. When people cross the border, we have a lot of people that you know, a lot of Border Patrol agents. We have, you know, thousands of them. But when they cross the border, we only have 5,000 ICE agents in the interior of the United States. Think about that. For the millions and millions of people that are coming across the border, we only have 5,000 ICE agents. So they can't do the job by themselves. And we need to make sure that we give them the skills and abilities and the tools so they can enforce the law. The third thing that I think we need to do is we need to modernize the immigration system. For too long, our immigration system has been about bringing families to the United States. That's not really what we need in the 21st century. We don't need to be bringing families to the United States. We need to identify the skills that we need to make America stronger. And it's one of the things that I think President Trump has been most misunderstood about. When he talks about America first, he's not talking about that we're not going to allow people to come to the United States. He's saying that the people that come to the United States should be the people that are going to help make America strong and help make America prosperous and help make America the nation that we want it to be. And a lot of those people are good people that want to come to the United States. So let's identify what those skills are that we need in the United States and let's bring them to the United States. And so those are the things that we need to do to modernize our immigration system. Now, I think you mentioned sanctuary cities. Is that?
Well, that was certainly part of the thing.
Yeah. So another thing that my Davis-Oliver Act does is it takes money away from cities that become sanctuary cities. And I think that practice has to end, where a city decides that they're not going to help enforce the law of the United States. Now, I'm not going to force cities to enforce the law. That shouldn't be our job. But a city should not prevent their local law enforcement from actually aiding the enforcement of immigration laws. And when you have cities like San Francisco and others where they literally tell their sheriffs that no, you cannot detain people in jail even though they have an ICE detainer, or you cannot do certain things to cooperate with the federal government. Those cities, I think they shouldn't be receiving certain funds that they're receiving from the federal government. So we need to make sure that we end sanctuary cities, we end illegal immigration, but I am for legal immigration. I think illegal immigration makes America strong, and I think what's making our nation weak is the lack of sovereignty. When you have liberals saying that we shouldn't enforce our laws, they're saying that our nation cannot be strong. And I always laugh, and I've shared this a couple of times, but I speak to some of my friends on the left, and they tell me about all these horrible stories, all these people that are escaping these nations, and they're coming here because their nations are not that great. And I say, you know, their nations are not that great because they don't enforce the rule of law. So what you're asking me to do is to turn our nation into one of those nations.
That's right.
And if we cannot be strong, where are we going to escape to? There's no other place like America, and we better make our nation strong, we better make our nation great, and we better stand up for the rule of law, because that's what makes us the greatest nation in the earth.
I'm getting the signal that we're done? All right. So, well.
Oh, and yes, thank you. The wall, absolutely. We need to build a wall. Absolutely. Yeah. Now let's be clear. Even the president does not mean actual wall all the way across the nation. There are some areas where you need virtual walls. There are other areas where you're going to have technology. So when you're talking about a wall, even listen to the president himself. He's talked about this. You're talking about because different sectors need different things. They have different needs. But that's why the number one thing that we have to do is we have to prevent people from coming into the United States illegally. So we have to make sure that we do that.
We've got some excellent questions, but we also ran out of time. And so hopefully Congressman will be able to stick around. But did you want to have a wrap-up statement?
I just want to thank you for this opportunity. I want to thank you for being here. You know, it's not always easy to, on a Tuesday afternoon, to take time away from the things that you're doing. But it has been such a tremendous honor for me to represent you in Washington. I'm really looking forward to this opportunity to serve with you. I was talking to Pastor Tim earlier, and he and others were mentioning to me that the one thing they have enjoyed about working with me is that they know that when I tell you that I'm going to do something, that I will follow through on it. You know, like I said earlier, you're not always going to agree with my answers. I think if you know, I don't even agree with myself 100% of the time, right? Sometimes you think about something and think, okay, I changed my mind about that. But the reality is that I will always follow through. If I tell you I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it. And the one thing you need to know about me is that I will fight. I'm not only going to do it, but I'm going to fight for those things. I'll make sure that I stand up for the things that I believe in, and I will always make sure that I put Idaho first, that I do everything I can to make Idaho strong, and that I will make sure that the future of Idaho is better and more prosperous. So I hope that you can join in this race. I hope that you can join me, and let's work together to make sure that the future of Idaho is strong. Thank you very much.
Yeah.